Okay, we're going to add and subtract some more rational expressions, and they just seem to get a little bit harder. So what we're going to do on these is make sure that we factor these denominators, so then we can see what our common denominator is once things are factored. So x squared minus 5x plus 6, that is going to factor into x minus 3 times x minus 2, and then x squared minus 4 factors into x plus 2, x minus 2. So remember, we have to have everything, so they both have this x minus 2, so our common denominator only has to have that one listed once since it's in both of them, but we need that x minus 3 and the x plus 2. So all of this, x minus 2, x minus 3, x plus 2, is our common denominator. So remember, now this first term, we're going to just keep in mind, it's got the x minus 3, it's got the x minus 2, but it needs the x plus 2. Now that second term needs the x minus 3. So that's what we're going to multiply that second term by. Okay, so let's start making these equivalent fractions by multiplying what we need. So we've got 3 over x minus 3 times x minus 2. And all I did is put that x squared minus 5x plus 6 in a factored form. Now we said this first term needs that x plus 2, so we're going to multiply this first term by that x plus 2. Now we have a plus sign, and we've got our second term, that 2 over that x squared minus 4, but we're going to leave it in factored form, x plus 2, x minus 2. Now that term, we said, needs that x minus 3. So we're going to multiply that term by the x minus 3. Okay, so now we've got to multiply these things out. So we're going to multiply this whole thing out. And remember, this 3 is multiplied by that x plus 2. So that makes 3x plus 6. And now that's over that whole common denominator. So x minus 3, x minus 2, x plus 2. Now we're going to add, and let's multiply this one out. So this 2 times the x minus 3 leaves us 2x minus 6. And now it's over that whole denominator again. So x plus 2, x minus 2, and x minus 3. Okay, so I know you may look at those and say, well, they're not the same. Denominator's order doesn't matter in multiplication. So we'll make sure we put those all in the same order. So now we're ready to add the numerators. Okay, so we've got that 3x plus 6. And since this is a plus sign, we're adding plus 2x minus 6. And now it's all over that common denominator. So remember, we only list that denominator once when we're adding and subtracting. So now we're going to combine like terms in the numerator. So we've got 2x in the 3x, which makes 5x. And the plus 6 and minus 6 cancel each other out. So we only have a 5x in the numerator, and then our denominator is always staying the same. That's why we get those common denominators when we're adding. So there's your final answer. Okay, I know this is a lot of steps, so remember, first you've got to come up with the common denominator. Then you're making equivalent fractions. Then you're going to add, once you get those equivalent fractions multiplied out, then you add your numerators and keep that common denominator, and then you reduce if if you're able to. So that's what we're doing here. Okay, so this 2x squared minus 6x plus 18, well, we can factor a 2 out of that and get x squared minus 3x plus 9. Well, it doesn't look like that is going to factor anymore because nothing times any multiples of 9 are not going to add up to be a negative 3. So we are just going to leave it like that. Now this x cubed plus 27, now remember that looks like the difference of two cubes. We just learned that. So we've got the difference of two cubes, and remember our acronym SOAP that we used. So this is an x and this is 3 cubed. 27 is 3 cubed. So that factors into x plus 3, same sign for that SOAP acronym that we used. X squared minus 3x plus 3 squared is 9. So that is that one factored. Okay, well, luckily they have this x squared minus 3x plus 9 in common. So our common denominator is going to be 2 times that x plus 3 times x squared minus 3x plus 9. So all of that is our common denominator. That first term is going to need the x plus 3. That second term is going to need, looks like just the 2. So we'll multiply the second term by 2, the first term by an x plus 3. So let's make equivalent fractions. Next section, next step rather. So we're leaving this as 2 times x squared minus 3x plus 9. We're multiplying this first term times that x plus 3 over x plus 3. Then we have a minus, so we've got to keep in mind that this is going to be a minus. Let's see, that 2x plus 6, well, let's go ahead and leave it at that for now, and then looks like we could factor that out. But let's see. Okay, so our second term, 2x, that has the x plus 3 and the x squared minus 3x plus 9. And we need to multiply it by that 2 over 2. Okay, because it needed the 2 in the denominator. Okay, so now we multiply them out. I'm going to take this, multiply it all out. Remember, this is 5 times the x plus 3 on top, so that makes 5x plus 15. And that is all over now that whole common denominator. Now we're subtracting. We're multiplying this 2 times this 2x plus 6, which gives us 4x plus 12. And now that is over that whole denominator. All right, so now we're going to subtract our numerator. Since this is a subtraction, remember we have got to distribute that negative sign. So we're going to have 5x plus 15 minus the 4x minus the 12, because remember that's got to be distributed to both of these terms inside those parentheses, and that's all over that common denominator, 2 times x plus 3 times x squared minus 3x plus 9. Okay, let's add our like terms. So 5x and the negative 4x leaves us with x, and 15 minus 12 leaves us with positive 3, and that's all over that common denominator. So remember, we learned how to multiply and divide these out last week, and that is why we learned the multiplication and division first, because it's a lot easier. This addition and subtraction does get a little bit harder to do, so just keep in mind the difference between those. So look, we have got an x plus 3 in our numerator and an x plus 3 in our denominator, and so since those are like terms, then we can reduce that down to a 1, leaving our final answer 1 over 2 times x squared minus 3x plus 9. And that is final answer. And you can always leave that denominator in factored form. So, okay, let's do a couple more. We have got another subtraction. So let's factor that denominator. So x squared minus 2x plus 1 factors into x minus 1 times x minus 1. This x squared plus x minus 2 factors into x plus 2 times x minus 1. Well, they have this one x minus 1 in common, but they don't have the second one, so we are going to have to list that twice. Okay, so our common denominator is going to be x minus 1 times x minus 1 times x plus 2. All of that is the common denominator. So what does the first term need? It needs an x plus 2. So we're going to multiply that first term times x plus 2. That second term, the denominator, needs another x minus 1. So we're going to multiply that second term by x minus 1. Okay, so let's make our equivalent fractions. So we've got 1 over x minus 1 times x minus 1. We need to multiply that one by the x plus 2. And we do it to the bottom. We're going to do it to the top. This is a subtraction. So again, we're going to make sure that we distribute that when it comes time. We've got this x plus 1 over that denominator factored was x plus 2, x minus 1. And we said this term needs to be multiplied by the x minus 1. Okay, so now let's multiply them out. So this thing, the first term here, multiplied out, we've got an x plus 2 in our numerator, x minus 1, x minus 1, x plus 2. We're subtracting. Now a common mistake is to try to start reducing things here, but you do not want to do that. Let's multiply this out. Remember, this is going to be two binomials, so you're going to FOIL it. X times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is negative x. 1 times x is negative 1, and 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. That is the difference of two squares, so it's just x squared minus 1 all over that whole denominator. Now, since we multiplied that out, remember this minus sign, we've got to distribute it to both of those. So now we're subtracting our numerators, keeping that denominator of x minus 1, x minus 1, x plus 2. We've got x plus 2 minus x squared plus 1 now in our denominator, in our numerator, since we distributed that negative sign. So let's combine like terms. We have a negative x squared, and we have positive x plus 3 all over that entire denominator. Okay, you can leave your answer like that, or we know we don't like that negative, so you could factor out a negative 1. Let's just make sure this doesn't factor any. Nothing times 3 is going to add up to be a 1, so that won't factor. So really either one of these would be an acceptable answer. There. Okay. On this last one, okay, it is going to be, it's a division one, so we would have to flip this one and multiply it. So let's go ahead, and this is a multiplication one, so so we're going to have to factor everything and then just make sure we flip that second one. So let's see what happens. If I take this and I factor out 4, That leaves me with x to the fourth minus 1. That thing is going to factor even more than that, so it's going to factor into 4. That would make it x squared plus and minus 1. And so that x squared and minus 1 would factor into x plus 1, x minus 1. Whew, that's just that first term factored. X squared plus 3x minus 4, that would factor into x plus 4, x minus 1. Okay, so now we're going to multiply, and remember we're flipping this so that 3x minus 15 is now on the top, but we're going to factor out a 3, and that leaves us with x minus 5, and then that 2x is on the bottom, times x squared plus 4x, we can factor out an x, and that would leave us with x plus 4. This one, let's see, it's a 4 term, so let's do grouping. So we're going to factor out 2x squared out of those terms, and that would leave us with an x minus 5. And then if we factor out a 2, that would leave us with an x minus 5. So that would be 2, let's see, what is that going to be? 2x squared plus 2 times x minus 5, but we can factor a 2 out of that, leaving us with x squared plus 1. Then times that x minus 5. Okay, so that whole thing factored, x minus 5. Alright, so now, since this thing is multiplied, this is going back to some of our previous lessons, we are going to start reducing. So we do have this x squared plus 1. This 4 can be this 2 times 2 here is 4. So we have an x plus 1. No, we have an x minus 1. This can reduce. We don't have a 3, but we do have an x minus 5. This x can be reduced with that x, and then we have this x plus 4 reduced with that. Whew, okay, so then remember on our multiplication, all we do is write what's left. So we've got on the numerator a 3, and x plus 1, all over nothing, everything reduced out. So there, that would be your final answer. So this whole crazy thing in number 4 just reduced down to a 3 times x plus 1. That's pretty cool. Okay,